welcome to another NJ Thrives Thursday. We host this every Thursday at 12 p.m. It's a weekly webinar series for New Jersey small business owners. So that said, I'm your host, Christian Pichardo, NJSBDC marketing consultant and CEO at nilimamedia.com. So here at the America's New Jersey Small Business Development Centers Network, or NJSBDC for short, we're a statewide program powered by the SBA and partners to help small businesses in New Jersey with no-cost small business consulting, training and events like this one starting at $0 and exclusive small business resources. You can go to the link to learn more at the bottom right of your screen. So for today's agenda, we're going to go over 3 headlines today, and we'll get into the webinar, and at the end, we'll hold a Q&A session. So as for headlines this week, so the first one up is we actually partnered with the Heldrick Center over at Rutgers University, and we took a survey of New Jersey businesses to see, what's going on, what do they need, what are some struggles that you're going through right now, so that we could address them in our services and events. So the findings are here. I'm not going to talk about all the findings. There's quite a few interesting things that I think could, that might even help you. So we'll put the links of this in the chat so you could take note of this data, which I think, could be helpful. Number 2, applications for the Small Business Lease Grant Program is now open. So it opened yesterday, and this is just a reminder that it opened. So yeah, this is the page where you would be submitting your information at. Here's where the program details are, eligibility, things like that. So there you have that. And final headline is on October 28th, next week, actually, Thursday. Ray Chambers, a philanthropist, humanitarian who serves with the World Health Organization, he's going to be speaking at the Rutgers Business School Virtual Business Community Engagement Conference. So this conference is all about managing uncertainty, so financing workforce and sustainability. And although it doesn't say anywhere here, but like I said, Ray Chambers is one of the individuals that's going to be speaking at the symposium. And if you don't know, he was named Time's 100 most influential people in the world in 2011. He was given a Citizens Medal by when he was president, George Bush, for his work in stopping malaria worldwide. So big things and big people at the symposium. So it should be interesting. Again, we're going to drop the link for this event into the chat. So that being said, 3 things to keep in mind. Type your questions into the Q&A box. If it's in the chat, there's a lot of conversations going on in there, so your question might get lost. So what we first do is check the Q&A box for any questions. So if you want it answered, we would highly recommend you put it there. Number 2 is you're going to get redirected to a survey after this event. It takes 3 minutes to fill out. And after you submit the survey, you'll get access to the speaker's presentation slides and also a link to the recording. Number 3 is by attending this event makes you eligible for the Upgrade Your Business certificate. You can learn more about that at that link below. Again, all links are put into the chat. Now, for today's event, I'd like to welcome Michelle Schaff. She's going to, this is part 3 now of the Protect Your Tech series. This is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And today it's proactive planning for small business cyber attacks. So how you doing, Michelle?
I'm well, thank you. How are you today?
Good, good. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and get myself out of here so you can get the show on the road.
Before you get yourself out of here, can you confirm that you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent.
You're good to go.
So what we're talking about today is actually preparing for the when, not the if, because unfortunately, every business is susceptible. And for those of you who've joined us for our other lunch programs during this month of October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month, you've already seen the quote that there are two kinds of businesses, those that have been compromised and those that don't know that they've been compromised. So it's important that you know where your go pack is. So several years ago, I lived in Tokyo, and we were told that this is earthquake territory. And because it's earthquake territory, you need to have a go pack. And so what we had hard hats, we had flashlights, we had extra batteries, we had water, we had non-perishable food, and various other items that we should have had with us if, God forbid, an earthquake occurred and we needed to pick up and run, literally. For those of you who are mothers, you know that when you were pregnant, you had a go pack so that when you went into labor, you and your partner were not running around your house with your heads cut off like chickens and saying, oh my God, what do I need to go to the hospital? You were ready. The problem, particularly for small and mid-sized businesses, is either they don't have a go pack, they're not sure what's to go into the go pack, and don't necessarily know where it is if, God forbid, they experience a cyber event. So before we get into our discussion, as you know from prior presentations, we need to give our legal disclaimer. So of course, here is our legal disclaimer. I am available as a consultant through the SBDC. So if you do need further counseling or guidance on these topics, please feel free to reach out to the SBDC to schedule an appointment. We need to understand that these things are disruptive. And if you think about what we did as kids, we had fire drills. It was muscle memory. You knew what to do when the event happened. At least you hope you did. The same thing should be with a cyber event. You don't want to figure out the day that something happens, what you're going to be doing. So you need to be prepared, and you need to know who should be prepared. And having those lines of communication established in advance will allow you to react more quickly, more effectively, and to help you get back to business. And again, I refer you back to our prior presentations. The problem with a lot of these events is that they're not discovered right away. The average time, particularly since we've been in the midst of COVID, and even though we are starting to see the end of that experience, it's still ongoing. And particularly for small business owners, you may have been working remotely all along. When you've got a dispersed workforce, do they know who to contact if something happens? Do they know how to contact, and how are you communicating with them? And I will share with you that there was a major law firm hit by, and I confess I forget if it was Petya or not Petya, which they were hit by back in, I believe it was 2017. The way that they were communicating with their personnel, what had happened was that when you came off of the elevator into the main floor of the offices, there was a chalkboard in the front lobby which said, we've had a cyber event. This is how you're going about business. That's not the ideal way to prepare for an event. And these things don't happen conveniently. They will happen on New Year's Eve. They will happen on Saturdays. They will happen at 2 o'clock in the morning. You need to know how you're communicating. And if your incident response plan, assuming of course that you have one, is stored on your computer and you're hit by ransomware, you're not going to be able to access it. So we need to not only have a plan, we need to know where that plan is and that we will be able to get a hold of that plan when we need it. One of the things that I strongly encourage businesses to do is know who your law enforcement officials are before an event occurs. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, no, I really don't want the FBI in my shorts. I don't want the New Jersey cyber unit in my shorts, what have you. The problem is that you need to get over that stigma. They share information. They share information weekly. And you'll see at the end of our slide deck, I will share with you some resources, including how to contact the FBI and how to sign up for the New Jersey Cyber Unit's weekly alerts so that you know what's out there. I realize again that we're still in the midst of COVID and you can't necessarily meet people face to face, but before you have an event, why not reach out to the state cyber unit? Why not reach out to the FBI? Know who runs your local field office. Introduce yourself. Say, hi, I'm Joe Schmo. This is my business. And I just wanted to get to know you before I actually need to call you. This way, when you're reaching out, not only might your request or your alert get moved to the top of the list because it's somebody that they know, but you have a face to reach out to. You have a phone number to contact. And understand that the FBI and the New Jersey State Cyber Unit have resources about events that have already occurred to other businesses. So if, God forbid, you're hit by ransomware, before you pay the ransom, you might want to find out, is there a decryption key available to me that I don't have to pay ransom to access? That's important information to know. It's important information to see what type of scams are out there right now. And these are resources that can tell you the intelligence that's available in your community, that's available nationally. What type of phishing attacks are hitting, for example, fintech? What type of phishing attacks are targeting healthcare? To understand what's out there and then to educate your personnel so that either you can identify an attack when it's occurring, or better yet, avoid it in the first instance. If you have that relationship, you will be able to communicate more effectively and more quickly. And I will tell you that the FBI receives reports all the time. But if you can pick up the phone and call your local enforcement officials at the FBI or at the New Jersey State Cyber Unit, you're going to get that much more information and that much more attention quickly. You can then prevent attacks, learn what's out there, and when it does occur, have them be your partner in resolving the issue. They're not there to embarrass you. That's not the FBI's goal. It's not the New Jersey State Cyber Unit's goal to embarrass businesses. So in terms of how to interact, these are some resources. You can contact the Internet Crime Complaint Center. You can contact CISA. You can contact various other organizations, including the NJTT. The other way to interact, and unfortunately, because of COVID, these things aren't happening right now, but hopefully in the next year, the Citizens Academies will resume. And what's great about the Citizens Academy, and I actually attended the last Homeland Security Citizens Academy before COVID shut these things down, is you get to meet the folks in the local field office. So when we were doing the Citizens Academy, we were over by Newark Airport. The offices are on the far side of the airport. And we were introduced to all of the local officers that man that station. We got to know them by name. We had their email addresses. We had their points of contact. So if I had an issue that I then wanted to report to the FBI or Homeland Security, I didn't just have the IC3 reporting tool. I had a person who I was reaching out to. They knew me and I knew them. And I would strongly encourage you to go to the websites to see when they plan to rekindle the Citizens Academy. Get to know the people there. The other thing that's nice about the Citizens Academy is that you get to meet other local business people. So again, if you're in fintech, you will probably meet other people in fintech as well. What was interesting about the group of folks that I was involved with when I did my HSI Citizens Academy is I was the only attorney that was there. There were folks that were in the shipping industry. There were folks that were in fintech. There were folks that were in a number of different types of businesses in the area. And we all got to know each other and to understand that we were there to help each other. So if, God forbid, you guys do have an event, share that information so that the next business in your same industry or in a related industry know what's coming down the pike. If you're not sharing this information or you're not receiving the information that's being shared, you simply can't be better prepared and better informed. Again, they push out weekly alerts. They have programs that are available. And as I mentioned, they have decryption keys to at least half the known flavors of ransomware. Also, in terms of wire fraud, if you report wire fraud in a timely manner, they can help to get money back. If you're not reporting that in a timely manner to the FBI, if you're not reporting it in a timely manner to your bank, they can't help you recover those funds. They can help you to evaluate what's going on and where it's impacting your systems. These are key issues in terms of having an effective incident response plan. As I said, they're not here to embarrass you. They're here to help you. And it's interesting because oftentimes when I'm speaking with other folks in this space, they say, oh, no, we don't want to bring in the FBI. And in fact, Delta found out, unfortunately, that they had a compromise because the FBI contacted them. They had seen traffic that was going on. Delta wasn't even aware of it. The FBI reached out to Delta and said, hey, guys, you've got a problem. They are there to make sure that you are being treated for what you are. You are victims of a crime. Now, whether or not you had reasonable measures in place to prevent that crime is a different conversation. And by the way, please feel free to avail yourself of the resources that we've already recorded with the SBDC, talking about what reasonable measures small businesses should have in place to prevent and detect these compromises quickly and to respond effectively. But again, if you're not communicating with the resources that are available, it's going to be that much more challenging. And by the way, if you do report to law enforcement in a timely manner, then when, God forbid, you do have to deal with litigation or regulatory claims, you could say, hey, wait a minute, guys, I responded quickly. I involved law enforcement. I shared with them what happened. That's going to go a long way towards regulators thinking about whether or not they're going to fine you. And it's going to go a long way to your ability to respond to claims from people who've been impacted by the attack, because you've been forthright, you've been forthcoming, and you've been proactive and not trying to sweep something under the rug. Also, I will tell you that you will have more resiliency in your own organization if you get involved with sharing resources. And when I say sharing resources, I go back to the NJKIC. Today is Thursday, coincidentally, and today NJKIC will push out its weekly alert. And if you sign up for those weekly alerts, you will see what is hitting businesses in the Garden State currently. And you'll also see resources as to how to prevent those from impacting your businesses. There are a number of other sharing resources. ISACA is one, CISA is another. And again, if you fill out the survey, you'll get these slides. You'll see how to join these organizations. Some will charge you a fee, some are for no fee. But again, if you don't join the sharing information sites, you won't know what's coming down the pike and you won't know the solutions. So that when we talk about vulnerabilities, for example, Microsoft has Patch Tuesday, and they will push out patches. If you have tools that need to be monitored and patched, understand where the vendors are posting those patches and when they're posting them. Microsoft is not unique in having a set date when they push out patches. If you're not sure where patches may be available for the different vendor resources you're using, reach out to those vendors proactively. Ask them, how are you pushing out patches? When do you push out patches? And by the way, are your devices set to receive those patches? So I have a Samsung. This is my handy dandy Samsung cell phone. It is set to receive patches automatically. And then I get alerts that say there is an update available. And an update is a polite euphemism oftentimes for not just an update, but a patch to prevent further compromises of my cell phone. When you get those alerts, don't hit remind me later. Patch it early, patch it often, and know what's out there. By having these proactive resources and these sharing as part of your incident preparedness, it has been shown by these studies done by Poneman, and I realize I'm referring to a 2019 survey. It's repeated again and again in the 2020 survey, the 2021 survey, The more that you are involved in these sharing resources, the more likely that you'll know what's coming down the pike. We're coming up on Halloween. Halloween is ripe for compromises because people want to click on links for the latest costume. They want to click on link for the latest parties. Teach your people what not to do and how to report if they do. If your people don't know who to report to, then they could have clicked on something and not even known who to tell. Now, today's program is focusing on having that plan. As I mentioned earlier when we first got into this, the day of the earthquake is not when my husband and I should have figured out, oh my God, what do we do if there's an earthquake? Do we have water handy? Do we have food handy? Do we know where the evacuation plan is for where we lived in Tokyo? It's the same thing with a cyber event. You have to have a plan that's already written down and readily available. You need to know where it is, and other members of your incident response team need to know where that is. Think about this. If God forbid somebody had a heart attack in your office, hopefully you have an AED. Where is that AED? And when we think about how you're responding to an event, what are you responding to for? Is it just personally identifiable information? Is it protected health information? Is it client information? You need to understand what points of information have been compromised and what type of reporting obligations do they trigger. You may have contractual obligation with your clients that say, if you have an event that impacts any data, you have to tell me about it. Or your agreement with your clients may simply say, if you've had an event that has compromised our information or could compromise our information, you have to tell us about that. You also want to understand in advance what law enforcement officials do you have to notify? And that's going to depend on whether your business is based in only New Jersey, or do you also have offices in New York? Are you subject to certain laws, for example, HIPAA, which require you to report to OCR? You need to know who you're reporting to and when that reporting obligation kicks in. Now, I know that we're focusing on not only New Jersey, but US law, but just by way of example, I'm sure you've all heard about the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. If there's an event that is impacting personally identifiable information of citizens in the EU or the UK, notice has to be given in 72 hours. That's a very short window. And if you don't have that as part of your incident response plan and you can't access your computers, when do you expect to figure that out? Similarly, if you do business in New York and personally identifiable information of New York residents is compromised, at least 3 different organizations in the state of New York have to be notified. And depending on the size of the breach and the nature of the breach, possibly 4 different organizations within the state of New York have to be notified. And by the way, New York has a specific form that you have to use to give notice of an breach. California has its own form. And to the extent that you don't know what assets you have and what have been compromised in a breach, you're not going to be able to respond effectively and to report in a timely manner. So all of this should be part of your incident response plan. You also need to think about who should be part of your incident response team. Part of that team should be your internal organization and should be your external resources as well. Now, some of you may have cyber insurance, some of you may not. If you have cyber insurance, I can tell you right now that unless you contacted and negotiated with your carrier prior to placing that coverage, your insurance carrier is going to tell you who your external resources are. And when I say they tell you, so let's suppose that you have insurance with Zurich, just by way of example, and now you've had a cyber event, and you contact your insurance carrier and say, okay, who's my breach coach? Meaning, who is the attorney who's going to help me walk through this event and manage my response? Now, I'd like to think that you all appreciate the value that I bring to the table, and I am a breach coach. But I can tell you right now that I am not on Zurich's panel of approved attorneys. So you could find yourself working with an attorney after a cyber breach that you've never met before. That may or may not be of comfort to you when you're in crisis, that you're now meeting for the first time the person who's supposed to help you get through this event. So my advice to you, if you have cyber insurance, is ask your carrier who is on your panel for attorneys, who is on your panel for forensic resources, who is on your panel for a crisis communication counselor. Get to know those resources. And by the way, if you don't like who those resources are, ask your carrier, could I use my own if they will meet the fees that you've negotiated with those who are on your panel? So by way of example, I was brought in as a breach coach in an event where they had already been involved with an attorney designated by the insurance carrier. The company that had been breached was not comfortable with the attorney that was handling it. And through their forensic team, who was on the panel for the insurance carrier, they reached out to me and said, can you help me? And I said, I can, but your insurance carrier may not cover the fees. We spoke with the insurance carrier, and what I said was, look, I will match the fees that you were otherwise paying to your panel counsel. And the carrier said, okay, good, use Michelle. That's not always going to be the case. And if that's not the case, find out who is going to be your breach coach and get to know them, talk to them, understand who the crisis communication counselor is going to be. And if you're not sure who or what is a crisis communication counselor, I assure you that crafting the message to your customers, to law enforcement, is very important. And who delivers that message is equally important. And I will tell you, a lot of CEOs say, well, obviously the message should come from me in the first instance. The problem with the message coming from the CEO in the first instance is that you have no place to escalate. So that you may want to designate a vice president or an HR director, depending on the nature of the breach, or the PR person for your office to be the first point of communication. That then allows you to escalate to the CEO if you need to escalate. But having that conversation with a crisis communication counselor in advance of a compromise will allow you, again, to be better prepared. You absolutely want your HR involved in the incident response team. You may need to communicate to employees that their information has been compromised. And having HR involved with that, they should have available, not just on the computer, a list of employees. And it's very important to have within that list broken out who lives in New Jersey, who lives in New York, who lives in Pennsylvania, who lives in Connecticut, and so on and so forth. Because as I said, different states have different incident response reporting requirements. Some jurisdictions say that you have to report to law enforcement within 10 days. Some say within 30 days. And some say that once you've confirmed that, for example, personally identifiable information about your personnel have been compromised, you have to notify those individuals within X many days. If you don't have the HR folks involved, you may have the complete list of current employees. And by the way, you may not have a complete list of former employees whose information may also have been compromised. You want to make sure who your forensic expert's going to be in terms of coming in and understanding, looking at your systems. How did this breach happen? How do we close the back door? And how do we understand what in fact has been compromised? Now, some of you may have internal IT resources and some of you may outsource that. Your outsourced IT folks or even your internal IT folks aren't necessarily qualified to diagnose your systems. And again, if you have insurance, they're going to provide you with a forensic team to help you do that. If you don't have insurance and you're looking for resources, I can certainly provide you resources. I will tell you that I am not the good housekeeping seal of approval for those resources, but I can certainly provide you potential resources for you to vet on your own. And again, you don't want to have this list put together after the breach has happened. You want to have this prepared in advance so that you know, if I were your breach coach, this is how I'm contacting Michelle. I'm contacting her at 973-530-2026. Let's suppose that Chris is your forensics expert. Do you have Chris's phone number? Do you know how to get in touch with him? And by the way, do you have an alternative resource to get in touch with him? How are you getting in touch with your HR folks? If all you have is your HR folks' work phone number and your work system is voice over internet and you can't access your internet through your work, how are you communicating with them? This all has to be part of your incident response plan and your incident response team. Now, again, understanding that you folks are small business owners, you may not have a robust board. You may, in fact, be having a conversation with 2 or 3 people within your organization. But don't underestimate the impact of panic. And if you're prepared in advance and you know how to communicate with each other, the level of panic is going to come down and you'll be able to respond more effectively and more efficiently. You also want to understand who your key vendors are. And in particular, put at the top of that list, your banking relationships. If God forbid, your bank access credentials have been compromised or may have been compromised. The other thing that I was shared with me by a PR expert was who covers your industry? And you're saying, what does she mean by who covers your industry? So we're here in New Jersey, and a lot of us get our news from the Star Ledger. Well, who reports to the Star Ledger on fintech? Who reports to the Star Ledger on the chemical industry? Who reports to the Star Ledger on the legal industry? Get to know those reporters. And you say, well, why do I want to get to know those reporters? The reason you want to know who's reporting on your industry is because that's who's going to be writing the article for the Star Ledger about your data breach. And if you make friends with those folks in advance and tell them, by the way, if God forbid I have a data breach, I'll come to you, but then I want you to deliver my message. Now, hopefully you're not going to have a breach that warrants reporting in the news, but if you do, you want to make sure that the press is treating you favorably. And you also want to know that the way you're finding out a cyber event occurred is not because a reporter from the Star Ledger caught you off guard and said, hi, this is Michelle Schaff from the Star Ledger. I see you've had a data breach. What's your response? If you know who the people are that are covering your industry in the news and you talk to them in advance, they're going to treat you more favorably. And if they have any intel, they'll come to you before they put you on the cover of their publication. It's very important that you manage that message. And you want to know who's going to be delivering that message. And what's also very important is when an event is unfolding, you better believe your phones are going to be ringing off the hook. And you want to make sure who is authorized to speak on the company's behalf. So let's suppose that I work for Chris and I'm the receptionist. Chris, as the CEO, is going to tell you it's not the receptionist who should be answering a reporter's question. You want to establish in advance who's going to be delivering that message and how is it going to be delivered, and make sure that your personnel know if they get a phone call, who should they be directing that phone call to. You don't want people speaking at the water cooler saying, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? Oh my gosh. You don't want to have gossip delivering the message to the media, and you certainly don't want gossip delivering the message to customers or other employees. You want to make sure that information is accurate, and you want to make sure the information is what you want to be disclosing in the moment. So what is the purpose of an incident response plan? Have an effective means to address the incident, to respond to the incident, to defend against future attacks, and to provide further deterrence. When you say provide further deterrence, how does that play into the incident response plan? Well, first of all, your incident response plan should include a lessons learned from the event that occurred, but also to think about, if God forbid the event occurred from an insider, how do you address those insider threats? And insider threats aren't necessarily malicious. They could be an act of stupidity, for lack of a better word. So let's suppose, again, I work for Chris, and Chris has done training for his personnel, and they've told us all don't to click on a link. Well, I was asleep at the switch that day and I wasn't paying attention. And across my site came an interesting link for a new pair of shoes. And I said, oh, I need those. And I click on the link. It wasn't the link for the new pair of shoes. It was a malicious website. Well, how does Chris prevent that from happening again? Is it training? Is it reprimand? Is it perhaps letting Michelle go if she's clicked on a link too many times and she's been the source of repeated compromise? That's something that you need to think about, and again, should be part of your planning and your incident response. You want to have templates prepared. So again, you're not responding in the moment. So if you look at my firm's incident response plan, we have various exhibits, and I'll share with you later in this discussion what some of those exhibits should include and what they might look like. But I have printed out, not just by link, but printed out what the reporting form looks like for the state of New York, what the reporting form looks like for the state of California, and various other jurisdictions that have forms that are mandated. You want to know what jurisdictions you're subject to. And by the way, you want to know, again, whether it's regulators that you're subject to. If you have to report to the Office of Civil Rights for a HIPAA compromise, what is the reporting form that they require? If you're subject to the New York State DFS regulations for the financial industry, what does their reporting form look like? And by the way, for the New York State DFS, that's a 72-hour reporting window. So again, you need to know what they require and what the report looks like. The other thing that you want to think about when you're dealing with, for example, wire fraud, is understand how you report to your banking institution. They are not going to freeze your account unless you fill out prescribed forms. And again, for my firm, our incident response plan includes copies of those forms and the links and the phone numbers of who to contact at our bank if, God forbid, we send an errant wire. And one of the things that I said, not only to our banks, but also to our insurance providers, is I want to have an alternative phone number to reach you when this happens on a Saturday or a Sunday. Because the work phone number is not going to do you any good if the compromise occurred at 7 o'clock or on 4th of July. You want to make sure this is part of your incident response plan. As I mentioned before, consider the jurisdictions that you're subject to. Is it New Jersey? Is it New York? Is it Pennsylvania? I know I sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but this should become muscle memory. I go back to the fire drills, the PTA calling trees, for those of us that are old enough to remember what those things looked like. You want to make sure you know who you're contacting, how you're contacting them, where you're contacting them, and the time frame within which you have to contact them. There are resources and websites that actually provide the list of the 50 different states' breach notification laws so that you know, if I have to report to Alaska, this is whom I'm reporting to, and this is how I'm reporting, and this is the time frame within which I have to report. And by the way, if God forbid you have a compromise that affects either 250 people in some jurisdictions, 500 in other jurisdictions, you can't just notify the impacted individuals. You may have to publish notice in the local newspaper. And whether or not you can deliver that message by email or on your website will depend on what you've set up in advance with people who use your websites. Did you tell them, I'm going to use your email that you've registered on this website for to let you know if there's a compromise? If you haven't done that, that may not be the means with which you can communicate that a breach has occurred. All of this should be part of your incident response planning. The other thing that you want to think about is tabletop exercises. Now, some of you may be familiar with this concept, but some of you may not. What you want to do is have scenarios and then play out those scenarios with your team. So, for example, when we've done tabletop exercises in my office, we've done a tabletop exercise for ransomware. We've done a tabletop exercise for a lost device. We've done a tabletop exercise for a phishing attack. Now, there are different resources for tabletop exercises, and this is just one example. And this is from the state of Washington. Again, go online, do searches, and these things are available for free. Some of them actually have playbooks that allow you to go through the role-playing exercise. And by the way, the last of this series in October is going to be a role play of a tabletop exercise of an event that has occurred. The best way to prepare for these events is not only to have the incident response plan, but to go through it. Assign roles to the people in your incident response team and then play it out. So consider this. Again, Chris and I work together. Chris has clicked on a link. He has that lovely, pardon my French, oh shit moment, and he now reports it to the incident response team. What does the incident response team do with that information? That's nice. Chris reported that he clicked on a fish. Now what? Well, you need to know what the answer is to now what. Do you need to look at the logs? Do you need to see if there seems to be any impact on your email systems? You want to make sure you understand what's going on. Now, Chris, I see that Denise has raised her hand. Can we allow, I don't know if there's a question in the chat or if we can have Denise raise her question.
We won't be, well, let's see. Okay, she said, please disregard. But yeah, if anyone raises their hand, please leave a question in the Q&A box.
I just want to make sure that we hadn't missed something that somebody was raising. And by the way, I know that we are allowing for Q&A at the end of the discussion, but as we're going through the slides, if there's something that occurs to you that you would like me to address with that slide, please don't hesitate to throw the question into the Q&A, because I'd rather it be addressed while the subject matter is on everybody's mind. I think it'll be that much more effective. In terms of other types of tabletop exercises, and by all means, don't use this just for a cyber event. Use it for other types of events as well. So that if, for example, you're thinking about the next IDA, God forbid, how are you going to be communicating with people if, God forbid, the offices are flooded? These are the types of events that you want to prepare for. You want to go through the tabletop exercises. You want to know what to do with the event, what to do in response to the event. And by the way, tabletop exercises can also be segmented within your organization. So one of the tabletop exercises that we've done in my organization was not involving the entire team, but was just involving our IT folks. And we're large enough that we actually have an IT team. And all 8 of them got together with an outside resource and went through how would they shut down systems and restore systems if we were hit by a denial of service attack, so that we would know how our systems would respond to that and what to do about it. Again, having these things tested and exercised and having people go through the events before the real thing occurs allows you to then respond more effectively. I go back to the example of, for those of us who are mothers and fathers for that matter, you may have attended a Lamaze class or some type of prepare for your birth class. It's so that you don't panic when in fact you go into labor and a baby's going to be coming. You want to make sure that you do the same thing when something far less pleasant than a baby arriving is occurring. How are you going to respond to that cyber attack? Who needs to respond? How are you contact them? And by the way, what happens if the normal means of communications are not available? Oftentimes what will happen is that you'll have a denial of service attack. And as you start to unfold what happened with that denial of service attack, and somebody's looking at the emails that are flooding your systems, somebody clicks on something and they've now launched ransomware. And now you have a 2-pronged attack. And so now not only do you not have access to your email systems, your systems are now shut down. And by the way, part of that incident response plan ideally would be to have backups and to know where those backups are and to make sure that those backups are what we call air gapped. And what air gap means is meaning that they're separated from your system such that if, God forbid, your live systems are compromised by a ransomware attack or by a virus, what you have in your backup systems are not infected with that same event. The other thing that's important to think about, and again, I realize it's challenging for small business owners, is that if in fact you've had an event and you do have clean backups, you don't want to launch those clean backups onto infected systems. If you put them onto servers and laptops that have been compromised, you're just recompromising what was otherwise clean data. And I would talk to your insurance providers, ask them what is and is not covered by your policies in advance, so you know whether or not you can get new clean systems on which to install clean data, or whether you should be budgeting as part of your incident response plan the cost of buying, God forbid, or leasing new servers, new laptops, new cell phones, and understanding where you would source them. This is all part of effective incident response planning. And in terms of other types of examples, this is just one more type of tabletop exercise to think about. And in terms of what an incident response plan looks like. Now, let me warn you that some of these things are extremely long. And incident response plans don't have to be 100 pages or 300 pages. They could be 5 pages, 6 pages, 8 pages, so long as it's effective for your business. That's really important. Now, I see that we have a question from Stuart as far as how does backing up to the cloud protect from these attacks? And that's a really important resource. And I would look to your cloud provider and ask them how they're protecting the information, but then making sure that you have a secure resource to access what you have in the cloud. Because if you're accessing your cloud accounts and then downloading information into your environment, are you now reinfecting it, or is it indeed segregated from that? Cloud is absolutely a very good way to have backups protected, so long as your cloud provider, God forbid, is not compromised. And by the way, what we talked about in prior discussions here is vetting those cloud vendors to make sure that if they're compromised, how are they backing up your information in their environments? And have they tested their own incident response plans? How quickly will they be back up? Some of them will tell you that they're going to be back up in 48 hours. Some of them will say that they'll be backed up in 24 hours. And some of them will say, we're working on it. You want to know what your cloud providers will do for you. Ask those questions. Call your account representative and have the conversation and have their resources as part of your incident response plan. Again, another example of what an incident response plan could look like if the attack is a network-based attack. What I want to share with you through these slides and through the links that you'll see in the slide deck when you get it are a number of different resources that you can go to and use and take what works for you. Now, what's very important is these are not one size fit all. It may not suit your organization. Keep looking for resources that fit your organization and that are going to meet your needs. Points of contact. I know that I sound like I'm being redundant here, and the fact is I am. You want to have those lists and you want to have them written out. And what I will share with you, and some of you have seen this before, I don't know if any of you can see how small this lovely little card is. And what I'm going to do, Chris, if I may, is I'm actually going to send to the folks at SBDC what's on this lovely little card.
Yeah, absolutely.
What this is, Chris, this is a 4x6 index card that says at the top, and I'm sorry, I'm holding it away from me because I can't read well unless it's hidden away, security incident device emergency contact information. So think about this, when your kids go to school, just on the first day of school, if not before, then you have to fill out the form of who should they contact if little Johnny falls off the jungle gym. Who should they contact if little Johnny needs to be sent home by the school nurse? This is your incident response plan for a cyber event. So what we have here is lost or stolen device. The contact is the IT director, his office phone number, his cell phone number, his office email, his home email. Cyber incident, suspected breach, suspected phish. Again, who do you report to? What are their points of contact at work and alternative? Because again, if you have denial of service attack or if you have a ransomware attack, having only the work email as the point of contact is not going to cut it. If you have a device stolen or lost, this is who to contact. And I will tell you, everybody in my office gets as many of these cards as they want. So by way of example, I have this card in my briefcase. I have this card in my glove compartment. I have it on my refrigerator, and I have it up at my ski house so that if I have a problem, I know who to reach and how to contact them. Again, think about if you want to have a resource for putting together the team if your work phone systems are down. There are different resources that you can use to communicate with your office staff. I go back to the example of the law firm that was communicating with its office with a chalkboard in the lobby. That's not an ideal means of communication. It's just not in the midst of an incident response. And again, when we think about COVID, you might have an incident response plan that includes people's phone number when they were at work. If folks are still working remotely, is the phone number that you have for them going to reach them where they are working remotely? And that's your internal resources and your external resources as well. Now, some of your customers I mentioned before may require you to notify them if you have an incident that impacts their information. Now, on our incident response plan, we have not only a full list of our customers, and that's updated quarterly to make sure that we have a complete list of the point of contact, the partner whose relationship it is, how to contact them by email, how to contact them by snail mail, how to contact them by phone. But if we have a particular client that says, if you have an incident response, you have to notify our Chief Information Security Officer within 24 hours. You have to notify by the telephone and by email. That's part of our incident response plan. It's written out, and we know who the relationship partner is because it may be that that's the partner who wants to make that phone call. Now, again, in terms of who should be communicating that incident and what the verbiage of that communication should be, that goes back to working with your crisis communication counselor. But you need to know who you're communicating with, when you're supposed to communicate with them, and how. The state has its own information security manual. And what's great about the state's security manual is not only does it include its incident response plan, it also includes other resources that you may want to avail yourself of so that you can say, what should my policies look like? And it will help you to craft what suits your business. Do not just print out these resources and say, okay, I've got it, it's good to go. Make sure it fits your organization and fits your organization's needs. NIST has an incident response plan that you can look to, but again, it may not be the right resource for you and the size of your organization. I will tell you that I've put together incident response plans for some of my clients, and we talk through specifically who's going to be your incident response team. And let's think about what is a critical event. You want to understand the type of event that you're worried about. You want to keep in mind the type of event that's going to cripple your business or cripple your customers or your employee relationships. Make sure that you understand what incident response, or rather what incidents need to be escalated. So for example, if somebody clicked on a fish, but you determined there was no harm, no foul, maybe you don't need to escalate that. Maybe you don't need to report it. But again, part of the incident response plan should say, how do you escalate and to whom and when? Now, the other important thing to keep about as far as incident response planning is that you need to have records. And those records need to be retained for 5 years from the date of the incident. So what you want to have attached to your incident response plan are templates of what those records should look like. So for example, our incident response plan has a template that says reporting. Who did the incident get reported by in the first instance? How did they report it? What time did they report it? To whom did they report it? How was it escalated? What details were given? How was it followed up on? And so on and so forth. And this should be kept until the incident is fully extricated. Make sure that you have eradicated it from your systems. You've done whatever reporting you needed to do, and you're back to business as usual, because you're going to want to be able to look back at that. God forbid it happens again. Documentation is not only for lessons learned, but for those obligations to report to the Office of Civil Rights or to the DFS regulators or anybody else to whom you have to report. And make sure that you're keeping your counsel informed, because to the extent that you can protect this by attorney-client privilege, you want to make sure that you're doing that. Other parts of the playbook I mentioned, again, having an active current list of your customers. And by the way, former customers as well, because if you're still storing data with regard to former customers and you now have to notify them about a breach, you need to have that list available. Banking relationships, not just who to contact at the bank, but have account numbers. Make sure that you know who you're reporting to, your personnel, and have it as part of the incident response plan and have that updated at least quarterly. If it's not kept current, it's not going to be effective. This is not how you want to communicate in the event of a breach. You want to make sure that people know who they're reporting to, when they're reporting to, how that's being communicated. In summary, have a plan, have a team, test that plan, update it, rinse and repeat. And for those that that may already have incident response plans, that's wonderful. The question is, have you updated it since COVID? Have you made sure that your points of contact are current? And by the way, is it by title or is it by individual, and have roles changed? And when did you last update the list of contacts on your vendors? So for example, let's suppose that I'm Chris's insurance carrier and I've now left Zurich. Does Chris know who at Zurich he's supposed to contact after Michelle has left? That's part of reviewing and updating that plan and making sure your points of contact are current. Chris, I've been doing a lot of talking. I'm going to catch my breath. I know we had the one question from Stuart.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have other questions, comments, thoughts here.
Yeah, so I'd like to open it up to Q&A now. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so yeah, please, for everyone who's still on this call, we have a couple minutes left. Please ask your questions. At this point, you could put it in the chat or in the Q&A because we're looking at that now.
Chris, as your own business owner, do you have an incident response plan?
Now I do.
There you go. And again, understand, Chris, as you're thinking about what your incident response plan should be, think about how many employees you have. It may be a very easy one. Can we go back to the previous page with the links? Tomorrow, just, once you complete the survey, you're actually going to get the slide deck. So you'll have a copy of all those links. So please complete the survey and then you'll get everything. I know that Chris took over the screen sharing. So Chris, I don't know if you want to toss it back to me just so I can put it up here in the meantime.
Yeah, let's do that. I'll stop sharing here.
So let's see. Let me see if I can get back to it. And there we go. And again, for those of you who aren't members of the New Jersey Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Cell, I would encourage you to sign up today. They push out their links on Thursdays. So if you sign up today, you're going to get that today. Chris, do we have any other questions, comments, or thoughts?
I don't see anyone asking any questions. I think the information you gave was super clear. So that's always good. So I guess if there's no more questions, please make sure that you're grabbing these links. Like Michelle said, once you complete the survey, you're going to get a copy of the entire slide deck. So you could obviously, go to this specific slide on your own, copy paste those links as needed. Oh, we have 2 questions. It's 1 o'clock, but we'll take them. So first one says, are there outside services to be hired to create an incident response plan?
And the short answer is yes. In terms of creating an incident response, first of all, there are free resources, which is wonderful. Those free resources, for example, through NIST, can provide templates. Sans Institute has templates. And again, these are free resources. And certainly you can consult with me through the SBDC to help you to develop an incident response plan. The other thing I will also tell you is that I do tabletop exercises with clients, so that if those of you would like to develop an incident response plan and then tabletop exercise it, again, through the SBDC, I'm happy to help you do that as well. And there are other, obviously, resources available. I don't know if SBDC has other resources besides me in this regard, but certainly please feel free to reach out through SBDC to contact me to help you do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, consultations through the NJSBDC are at no cost. We are funded by the SBA and partners. So that's basically why. I see another question here by Frank. It asks, what do you suggest for a startup with no paid employees and no investors for the funds yet?
Well, that makes it very simple in the sense that there's very few people that you need to communicate within your organization. If it's a show of one, you're communicating with yourself, and hopefully you're telling yourself not to click on suspect links to minimize your attack surface. But that said, I'm assuming you have a bank account. So you want to know if, God forbid, there's wire fraud, who are you contacting? And just because you are an organization of one doesn't mean you shouldn't know how to contact the resources that you have, whether it's your vendor for your online accounts, whether it's your vendor for your email system or anybody else. If you have compromises that impact your organization, you want to know who to call and when. And as you do start to grow that business, keep that active list of your customers so you know who to contact.
Awesome. Let's see. Okay, I see April Hughes contacted the SBDC for a consult with Michelle. Please, I'm going to give you a particular email. Just give me one sec. Okay, April, go ahead and submit your request there. And we'll end it off with this last note from Minerva saying, thank you so much for such an informative seminar. Past life, I was a career legal secretary and experience as a data breach at my former firm. I had no idea so much went into protecting data. I'll implement all these recommendations, even though it is just me running my business right now. I expect to grow. So I think that's a wonderful way to end this. So yeah, any last tips or tricks, Michelle?
I want to thank you all for joining us. You've already taken the first step by listening to this presentation to be prepared. Know who you're calling, know how you're contacting them, have that AED for the cyber event at your fingertips.
Yeah. And for next week, it's our the last part of our Protect Your Tech series, and it is what to do when your business is actually under attack. So hopefully we've gone through the planning, so you don't even have to, worry about that. But next week we'll give you some tips and tricks on that. So without that said, the NJSBDC has helped 13,000 small businesses. Again, if you want no-cost small business consulting, training and events starting at $0, exclusive resources, get to the link below, njsbdc.com/request-counseling. And that's it for today. We'll see everyone next.